Hey guys, welcome back. Tonight we're diving more into existential dread. We're talking about a sneaky little habit that's keeping your life on hold, the illusion of the transitional phrase. In this video, our pretty much very unprofessional yet soothing voice will help you out the 6 common mistakes that suck our life out of you and sabotage your positivity. Number 1, teleological thinking. Belief that life must always aim toward a final purpose. Forget the plagues and pottage for a moment. This is about the mental prison built out of your own hopes and dreams. We're diving into why you're constantly living in the future, how the greatest philosopher in Western history is partly to blame, and how to tell your brain to chill out and enjoy the disgusting present. Before we get comfortable, let me know in the comments. What's the one end state you're constantly chasing that makes today feel like a waiting room? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The tyranny of the final purpose. Congratulations, you've just woken up in the year 2025. The good news, you have indoor plumbing and memory foam. The bad news, your brain is haunted by a Greek ghost named Aristotle. Teleological thinking, as you pointed out, is the belief that life must always aim toward a final purpose, or telos. Aristotle used this concept to explain everything from acorns, whose telos is to become an oak tree, to human beings, whose telos is eudaimonia, or flourishing. It's an elegant philosophical idea, but when downloaded into your modern, high-stress brain, it becomes a blueprint for unhappiness. Your brain looks at your life like a video game with a single, non-negotiable end boss, deciding that every single day, every single action, and every single miserable Monday must be a direct, efficient path toward that final, completed version of yourself. The waiting room effect. This focus on the finish line creates what we call the waiting room effect. If you're a student, you're constantly whispering, "Once I graduate, life will finally start." If you're a junior employee, you're thinking, "Once I get promoted to manager, I'll be stable and happy." And if you're saving money, you're fixated on the thought, "Once I hit that magical number in my bank account, I can finally relax." This is the equivalent of being told, "You're going to Disneyland, but first you must spend 6 hours waiting in an extremely uncomfortable room with terrible music and lukewarm coffee." You're so focused on the theme park that the current actual reality, your life right now, feels like a meaningless holding pattern. The present becomes slow, dull, and actively resisted, and the witty twist is that you're not just sitting in the waiting room, you're paying rent on it, giving up your current happiness in exchange for a future happiness that is neither guaranteed nor static. The humorous trap of the completed self. Let's talk about that completed version of yourself. This person is an absolute fantasy. Your brain imagines future you as someone who has a meticulously organized pantry, effortlessly runs 10K every morning, whose partner always laughs at their jokes, who is financially immune to global crises, and who drinks water exclusively out of aesthetically pleasing glass bottles. This future you is the medieval equivalent of a perfectly illuminated manuscript, pristine, expensive, and totally unrealistic. The humor is that when you finally do achieve that goal, you get the promotion, you graduate, you hit the savings target, your brain doesn't clap and say, "Goal achieved. Happiness unlocked." Oh no. Your brain immediately pulls out a new, more terrifying goal and starts the cycle over again, like beating the first level only to unlock the actual level, which is harder and requires a whole new set of skills you don't have. This is because the purpose of the mind is not to achieve stasis. It's to identify problems and keep moving. So when you achieve a telos, your brain just assigns a new, even higher telos, ensuring the waiting room never truly closes. How to escape the teleological trap? Since we can't stop being human, and we can't stop being influenced by a 2,000-year-old Greek guy, we have to cheat the system. First, reframe the telos. Instead of defining your telos as a destination, a perfect career, define it as a process, the committed pursuit of skill, meaning your purpose isn't to be a finished artist. Your purpose is the act of painting today, which makes the journey the goal. Second, embrace the medieval mess. Your current life is messy, imperfect, and probably smells a little bit like stale beer and mold, just like the Middle Ages. And that's okay. True living happens in the chaos, in the argument you learn from, the mistake you fix, and the unglamorous hours spent studying, as those are the only hours you ever truly own. So stop waiting for the moment when everything is clean and perfect, because that moment doesn't exist. Finally, use the power of right now. Teleological thinking is the enemy of presence. So whenever you feel that anxiety creep in, that feeling that you should be further along, try to ground yourself in a small sensory detail, such as the weight of your coffee mug, the sound of the rain, or the texture of your worn-out sweater, and tell your brain, I am here, and I am functional. The future will handle itself. The final, witty truth is this. You are already the completed version of yourself today. You are the sum total of every experience you've had up to this second. Stop treating your life like a rough draft for a book that will never be published. The book is being written right now. And guess what? The current chapter is interesting, smelly, and full of character. Number 2, existential anxiety. Freedom creates uncertainty. If teleological thinking is the ghost of Aristotle demanding a final, perfect destination, then our next hurdle is the slightly moodier, chain-smoking cousin who hangs out in Parisian cafes, existential anxiety. If you've managed to wrestle the telos monster into submission, congratulations. You've discovered that the journey is the goal. But then, the universe throws you a curveball that's worse than medieval pottage. Absolute, terrifying freedom. The panic of the infinite menu tonight. We're diving into how freedom itself, the glorious, hard-won ability to choose your own path, becomes the very thing that locks you down. We're talking about existential anxiety, the philosophical root of which lies with thinkers like Jean-Paul Sartre and the entire gang of 20th century existentialists. Sartre famously argued that existence precedes essence. This is the philosophical equivalent of a jump scare. You are born, existence, as a blank slate, and you must define your own purpose, essence, through the choices you make. Unlike that acorn we talked about, you have no preset telos. You are truly condemned to be free, and that word, condemned, is not used lightly. Your modern, overworked brain hears this and doesn't feel liberated. It feels like it's standing in front of an infinite buffet where every single option is both delicious and possibly poisoned. And the waiter, that's you, is screaming because there's no manager to complain to. The humor here lies in the fact that we crave choice until we get it. And then we want nothing more than a strict, predetermined script written by a benevolent, slightly boring deity. The weight of choice and responsibility. The bad faith blitz. This is precisely why this kind of thinking makes you feel so terribly stuck. Transitions, those beautiful moments of growth, come with an unavoidable flood of choices. And choices, my friends, mean responsibility. That responsibility is heavy. It's the medieval wool blanket of accumulated grime draped over your shoulders. Except this time, the grime is the potential failure of your own decisions. When you feel this crushing weight, your primary, deeply human reaction is to want to escape the discomfort by rushing ahead. You desperately want to fast forward past the messy part, the part where you might fail, and jump straight to the version of yourself who already succeeded. Sartre called this urge to run away from freedom bad faith, the attempt to convince yourself that you are not, in fact, free, but rather defined solely by external forces or your past. Think of it. You tell yourself, I can't start that business because I'm a former accountant, or I must stay in this relationship because I'm a dedicated partner. as if the past or the label has become a chain, when in reality, it's just a history you are choosing to prioritize right now. This denial of your radical freedom is the ultimate self-sabotage, an attempt to trade your scary freedom for a comforting, yet false, sense of necessity. The career switcher's catastrophe and the liminal lull. Take the classic example, someone switching careers. They aren't thinking about the joy of learning a new skill. They're paralyzed by the weight of the question, what if this choice is wrong? This anxiety isn't about the job itself. It's about the uncertainty of self-creation. If you choose A and fail, it's not just the failure of a project. It feels like the failure of you. Your identity is wrapped up in that choice. The fear is not of unemployment, but of the existential realization that you are the sole author of your life's narrative, and every word you type is permanent ink, and you have no spell check. They yearn to skip the hard work and the insecurity, wanting to wake up tomorrow as the accomplished, established CEO or the successful artist. They desperately try to escape the feeling of in-betweenness, the liminal space between the person you were and the person you are choosing to become. This is the psychological equivalent of walking across a tightrope. Your footing feels unstable, and your brain is screaming for the solid ground of the far side. But rushing the tightrope is how you fall. You must learn to find stability in the very act of walking, in the uncertain step itself. How to ease the existential ache, the actionable present. The cure for existential anxiety is, ironically, the fierce and deliberate embrace of the small, messy present. You can't stop being free, so you have to learn to wear the freedom lightly. We must internalize that uncertainty is not a failure state. It is the raw material of creation. Every artist knows that the first few drafts are supposed to be terrible. The architect knows that the blueprint always changes once construction starts. So, when your brain is demanding certainty, tell it this truth. Certainty is the denial of freedom. If you were certain of the outcome, you wouldn't be making a choice. You'd just be following an algorithm, which is the definition of not being free. To manage this rush to the finish line impulse, you need to deliberately slow down the transition and practice what is called radical acceptance of ambiguity. Instead of focusing on the final, enormous outcome, the successful new career, focus only on the very next, smallest, most manageable act of creation. That small act could be writing one sentence of your book, making one phone call, or spending 30 minutes learning one new coding function. By dividing the overwhelming choice into tiny, present-focused actions, you dilute the paralyzing weight of responsibility and give your brain something immediate and manageable to chew on. The comforting truth, even the act of choosing is temporary. You choose today, and you can choose again tomorrow. Your life is not a single final sculpture carved in granite. It's a mosaic made of small, replaceable tiles. You are never condemned to a single mistake. You are only condemned to always choosing the next tile. That next tile, that next tiny action, is your freedom. Number 3, the gap between self and ideal self. Hold on to your metaphorical, unwashed medieval hats, because we are moving from the anxiety of freedom to the pure, unadulterated shame of the gap. If teleological thinking tells you where you must go, and existential anxiety screams that you're responsible for the whole trip, then our third trap is the one that sits you down, hands you a mirror, and tells you how utterly inadequate you are for the journey. We are talking about the gap between self and ideal self. The problem with Platonic perfection. This trap has its philosophical roots deep in antiquity, thanks to the very first perfectionist, Plato. We're dipping our toes into the concept of ideal forms. Plato suggested that everything we see in the messy, physical world, like a perfectly round table or a truly brave act, is merely a flawed copy of a perfect, eternal, non-physical form that exists somewhere else. There is a perfect tableness and a perfect justiceness. The modern psychological disaster happens when we apply this ancient Greek idea to ourselves. Your brain has created a platonic ideal form of you. This is the mental image of who you should be: the successful, organized, witty, financially solvent, six-pack owning, perpetually calm version of yourself who never forgets to floss. The mathematics of misery. This is why this trap makes you feel hopelessly stuck, because you've created a miserable equation. You have the actual self, the messy reality you inhabit today, and the ideal self, the platonic form in your head. The distance between the two, that yawning chasm, is the gap. The larger the gap, the more intense the psychological discomfort, and the more you feel the frantic, crippling need to move quickly, to close that space immediately, usually resulting in inaction. This feeling of being behind schedule is pure self-flagellation, fueled by an imaginary deadline set by an imaginary perfect person. The creative person's curse. Look at the creative person's curse. This person imagines their future self as a successful artist. Portfolio done, gallery show booked, rent paid solely by selling original works. This is the ideal self, shiny and complete. The actual self is currently staring at a blank canvas, terrified, maybe watching a YouTube video on medieval hygiene, definitely not making enough money to cover the oat milk latte they just bought. Every single day that they are not that successful, completed artist feels wasted, like they are failing a cosmic test. This gap creates a suffocating pressure that turns creation into a chore, or worse, leads to total paralysis. The core humor here is that the ideal self you invented doesn't actually exist in reality. It is a static, finished product, and living human beings are, by definition, dynamic, perpetually unfinished processes. Trying to be a finished product is the best way to stop producing anything at all. It's like trying to achieve the perfect final dinner party and spending all your time worrying about the perfect napkin fold instead of actually making the food. The tyranny of the should. This feeling is amplified by the sheer volume of shoulds we accumulate. I should be earning more. I should be starting my day earlier. I should be doing more intermittent fasting. These are not helpful guides. They are cudgels disguised as motivation. They are the voice of your internalized perfectionist society, and they function to constantly widen the gap because the goalposts of the should move every single time you approach them. The moment you clear one should, your platonic ideal self demands 3 more. This keeps you in a perpetual state of defensive inadequacy. Psychologically, what's happening is that the massive anxiety created by this gap is too much for the brain to handle productively. Instead of motivating action, it triggers a defensive shutdown. You're so afraid of making a mistake that might widen the gap, that might prove you're even further from the ideal, that you prefer to simply freeze. If you don't paint the canvas, you can't prove you're not the ideal artist yet. It's a self-inflicted limbo. How to bridge the fictional chasm. Since we can't banish Plato, and we certainly can't stop our brains from having aspirations, we must learn to manage the gap, not by closing it, but by shrinking the focus. First, we must commit to dismantling the ideal self. Recognize that your ideal self is not a destination. It's a narrative fiction. It's a story you tell yourself to feel better about the future, but it actively harms the present. Focus less on who you want to be and more on what you want to do today. This shifts the goal from a static identity to a functional process. Second, embrace the philosophy of small gap, big action. Instead of measuring the gap between your actual self and the platonic ideal, measure the gap between your actual self and your next logical step. The gap between me, an accountant, and me, a successful artist, is terrifying. The gap between me, an accountant, and me, an accountant who spends 30 minutes sketching tonight, is manageable. By focusing on the smallest possible unit of progress, you reduce the psychological distance to a non-anxious degree. This allows you to take action without the paralyzing fear of failing the entire ideal. The final, soothing truth is that the only actual reality is the actual self. The ideal self is a ghost, an aspiration, a polite lie. Living in the gap is choosing to live in the fiction. By accepting your imperfect, messy, procrastination-prone actual self, you give yourself the permission to fail small, learn immediately, and grow organically, which, ironically, is the only way you'll ever truly approximate anything worthwhile. Number 4, hedonic anticipation. Belief that happiness lives in the future. You've survived Aristotle, you've wrangled Sartre, and you've begun to dismantle your own Platonic perfectionist standards. Congratulations, you are standing on solid ground, or you should be. But now a new, more insidious trap appears, dressed not in the ragged robes of anxiety, but in the shimmering, entirely fictional glow of tomorrow. We are diving into hedonic anticipation, the comforting lie that happiness lives exclusively in the future. The problem with happiness insurance. This trap is particularly cruel because its philosophical roots are actually in disciplines meant to cure suffering, namely Stoicism and Buddhism. These systems teach us to manage desire and attachments, but our modern brains have twisted this lesson into a toxic form of happiness insurance. We deny ourselves pleasure and presence today because we're paying the premium for guaranteed bliss tomorrow. Hedonic anticipation is the belief that your emotional payout is always reserved for the next stage, the next goal, the next destination. Your brain is essentially an addict, constantly chasing the dopamine hit of imagining that future state as the one where happiness finally arrives. When you are in anticipation mode, your present reality, your actual, physical, here and now life becomes something to escape, not something to fully engage with. The addiction to the next stage. Let's be honest, your brain loves this game. Why? Because the future state is safe. It's controllable in your imagination. In the anticipation phase, the job is already secured, the apartment is already furnished, and your confidence is already unshakable. The present, however, is a chaotic mess of emails, packing boxes, visa paperwork, and general human frailty. The psychological consequence is that the entire preparation phase of any major transition, a career change, a move, starting a relationship, feels slow, empty, and frustrating. Why? Because you have mentally placed the entire reservoir of your potential happiness elsewhere, on a future date marked on an imaginary calendar. You are operating on an emotional deficit, perpetually waiting for the moment when the cosmic direct deposit hits your account. The migrant's mirage. The example of the move. Consider the person moving to a new country. This is a terrifying, exciting, life-altering choice, and they need all their mental strength to get through it. In their mind, they imagine that after the move, they'll step off the plane and instantly feel confident and free. They'll be witty in the local language, they'll have a social circle, and they'll possess that effortless expat glamour. This is the hedonic target. But the actual present is a purgatorial grind. Finding apartments online that might be scams, trying to translate complicated government documents, and staring numbly at an itinerary. Because the happiness is mentally located in the future, on the after, the entire crucial during phase feels worthless. Every obstacle in the present isn't seen as a challenge to be overcome. It's seen as an infuriating roadblock preventing you from reaching your pre-approved state of bliss. This is the ultimate irony. By rushing emotionally toward future happiness, they are actually making the hard work required in the present harder and draining it of any potential satisfaction. The Stoic and Buddhist backlash. This is where the philosophical irony is sharpest. True Stoicism, particularly the teachings of Marcus Aurelius, argues for the radical acceptance of the present moment and the control of one's internal judgments. The Stoic would look at the moving person and say, the visa application is an external indifferent thing. Your frustration is an internal judgment. Focus your virtue on executing the task competently, not on the fictional feeling that follows. The goal is internal tranquility, apatheia, not future euphoria. Similarly, fundamental Buddhism seeks to eradicate suffering by eliminating attachment, specifically attachment to desire and future outcomes. By fixating on the joy that will arrive when the goal is met, you create a powerful, painful attachment to a non-existent state. The moment you achieve the goal, the happiness either fails to live up to the anticipated hype, because imagination is always better than reality, or the hedonic treadmill kicks in and your mind immediately sets the next higher target. You are never allowed to simply be happy in the current achieved state. This treadmill effect is a core biological mechanism. Our baseline happiness level resets quickly after major positive or negative events. That initial spike of joy from the move will fade, and your hedonic anticipation mechanism will already be scanning the horizon for the next thing to pin its hopes on. Perhaps when I get the permanent residency, or when I buy a house. You are perpetually chasing a feeling that is fundamentally fleeting. How to reclaim the present and defeat the future. Since we can't chemically alter our dopamine pathways and we can't stop having desires, we must learn to redirect our focus back to the only time that actually exists, right now. First, practice cognitive separation of task and reward. When you are doing a difficult, future-oriented task, like filling out paperwork, consciously separate the act from the feeling. Tell yourself, my job right now is not to feel confident and free. My job right now is to locate my birth certificate. This lowers the emotional stakes of the present and allows for competent, non-anxious action. Second, embrace the principle of foundational joy. Stop looking for the big future joy. Instead, look for the small, actual joys that are already present in the task or the environment. That could be the satisfaction of checking one item off the visa list, the unexpected quality of the coffee in the new neighborhood, or the simple comfort of your pet asleep next to you. These foundational joys are resilient. They are not dependent on a future outcome. They are the medieval equivalent of finding a stray piece of salted meat in your pottage, a small, immediate, and undeserved delight. Finally, you must use mindful engagement to break the addiction to anticipation. When you catch your mind racing ahead to the glorious future, gently pull it back and force it to engage with a sensory detail of the present. Feel the chair beneath you. Listen to the specific sound of the street outside. Smell the air. This practice, taught by both Stoics and Buddhists, interrupts the escape mechanism. It reminds your brain that while the future is fictional, the present is real, and the real is where all the potential for action, and ironically, all the real, unscheduled happiness actually resides. You are not waiting for life to begin. The messy, frustrating work of life is happening right now, and by fully engaging with it, you make the future happen by default. Number 5, narrative identity. Life feels like a story that should progress right then. We have navigated the treacherous waters of future thinking, but there is one final, subtle, and intensely modern trap waiting for us, dressed up in the familiar garb of self-help and social media perfection. We are talking about narrative identity, the insidious belief that your life must adhere to the structural demands of a satisfying novel. If teleological thinking gave you the goal, existential anxiety gave you the freedom, and hedonic anticipation stole your present joy, then narrative identity gives you the plot hole. That terrible slow-motion moment when you realize the character development has stalled and the script is absolutely dragging. The tyranny of the 3-act structure. This trap has a sophisticated lineage, drawing from the philosophical root of hermeneutics, particularly the work of Paul Ricoeur. Ricoeur, among others, explored how humans don't just live life. We tell ourselves stories about our lives. Our narrative identity is the constantly edited, retrospective, and perspective tale we construct to give our existence coherence and meaning. You aren't just a collection of random actions. You are the hero of your own epic. The problem arises because your brain is a lazy, cliché-addicted editor. It loves a tidy story, and all good stories, the ones you read, watch, and scroll through on social media, must adhere to certain rules. The three-act structure, rising action, conflict resolution, and, most importantly, constant forward progress. This is why this trap makes you feel hopelessly stuck. When the plot slows, when you spend 6 months in the same job, in the same apartment, with the same slightly chipped coffee mug, it feels fundamentally wrong. It feels like the chapter is dragging, and the only solution, your brain insists, is to furiously turn the page and find the next dramatic event, even if that event is forced, rushed, or entirely unnecessary. The mid-20s identity crisis. I should be achieving something. The classic victim of the narrative identity trap is the person in their early 20s, or even their early 30s, who is suddenly hit by the paralyzing thought, I should be achieving something by now. This pressure doesn't come from a financial need or a practical deadline. It comes from comparing their own storyline to others. Their friend's Instagram feed shows the exciting Act 2 moment, the book deal, the successful side hustle, the move to a charming European city. Meanwhile, your own story feels stuck in the mundane exposition, buying groceries, paying off student loans, trying to remember if you brushed your teeth this morning. You are mentally measuring your life against the highlight reel of others, which is the curated, heavily edited final draft of their story. You forget that the chapters they left out were filled with rejection, boredom, bad decisions, and hours spent staring at the ceiling. The necessary dead time that makes real growth possible. The plot hole panic and the fear of stasis. The anxiety here is the fear of stasis, the belief that an unmoving chapter means the story is effectively over, or worse, that the narrative has been permanently shelved. This fear drives two destructive behaviors. 1. Forced conflict. Rushing into major, disruptive, often self-sabotaging changes just to get the plot moving again. Quitting a stable job, starting an unnecessary argument, making a massive impulse purchase. Anything to avoid the terrifying feeling of the slow burn. 2. Self-judgment as narrator. You begin to criticize your own character. I'm boring. I'm lazy. I lack drive. The internal narrator turns into a vicious critic demanding higher stakes and faster pacing. In reality, life is not a novel. It's a sprawling, poorly edited documentary with vast amounts of archival footage showing people just existing. The moments of apparent stasis are crucial for internal monologue, the deep, unseen work of integrating lessons, processing emotions, and consolidating skills. The novelist knows you need a moment for the character to sit quietly and think before the big confrontation. Your inner narrator, however, panics and tries to skip straight to the explosion. The episodic versus grand narrative mistake. The ultimate error of narrative identity is mistaking an episodic existence for a grand narrative. Most of life consists of small, self-contained episodes. You had a good episode today where you finished a difficult task. You had a bad episode yesterday where you argued with customer service. These episodes don't necessarily build directly toward the climactic Act 3 you are demanding. The great existential thinkers remind us that meaning is often found horizontally, in the richness of the daily episode, not vertically, in the trajectory toward a distant final goal. Trying to force everything into a clean, upwardly mobile arc denies the reality of human existence, which is messy, cyclical, and frequently illogical. How to edit your story for sanity. Since we are naturally narrative creatures, the cure isn't to stop telling stories, but to rewrite the rules of good storytelling. First, embrace the boring chapter. Recognize that slowness is a feature, not a bug of a rich life. Great depth in a novel often happens when the external plot stops, when the character is forced to wrestle with their interior reality. Give yourself permission to have a month or even a year where the main external plot is simply maintenance. Frame it not as stagnation, but as the incubation arc, a necessary period of quiet where resources are gathered and insights are slowly brewed before the next big action. Second, shift your narrative genre. Stop trying to write a high-octane action thriller or a predictable success memoir. Start writing a reflective, observational drama. In this new genre, success isn't defined by the size of your achievement. It's defined by the depth of your understanding of the current moment. Did you handle that tough email with grace? That's character development. Did you learn a new recipe? That's world building. These small internal victories are the true building blocks of a resilient identity. Finally, institute a one-chapter rule. Stop comparing your current chapter to someone else's imagined final book. Focus your comparative energy only on the last chapter of your own life. Ask, am I doing better? Am I wiser? And am I slightly more mature than I was 3 months ago? If the answer is yes, then your story is progressing perfectly, even if the external landscape looks the same. By making your own past self the only relevant metric for progress, you reclaim the pacing of your own life and silence the external critics who are demanding a better, faster, and utterly fictitious plot. Number 6, impermanence and the desire for control. All right, let's confront the final, greatest illusion that shackles the modern mind. We've chased the telos, escaped the anxiety of freedom, tamed the hedonic beast, and silenced the demanding inner narrator. But now we face the ultimate, undeniable truth of the universe, the one that makes every human heart and every financial planner gently weep. Nothing lasts. We are diving into the existential horror show of impermanence and the desire for control. This isn't just a feeling of being stuck. This is the full-blown philosophical panic that occurs when you realize the chair you're sitting on is slowly disintegrating. The air you breathe is changing composition, and even your carefully constructed sense of self is a temporary narrative held together by sheer willpower. The Buddhist buzzkill, Anicca and Tao. The philosophical roots of this trap are ancient and universal, residing most explicitly in the Buddhist concept of anicca, impermanence, and the fluidity emphasized by Taoism. These traditions state plainly, everything is flux, nothing is stable. This is not a judgment, it's a cosmic observation. Every thought, every feeling, every relationship, every empire, and every perfectly organized spice drawer is at best a temporary arrangement. Your mind, bless its little prehistoric heart, utterly rejects this idea. It is programmed for survival, and survival demands stability, predictability, and control. It wants to build a beautiful, sturdy sandcastle on the beach and pretend the tide is merely decorative. When life throws a major transition, a sudden move, a job loss, or the seismic event of a breakup, it's not just an inconvenience. It's a terrifying, visceral reminder that the sandcastle is dissolving. The panic of the dissolving self. This is why the experience of being stuck in transition is so acutely painful. Transitions force you into the awareness that nothing is stable. The mind registers this existential threat and panics. Its immediate, desperate response is to try and speed up the process so it can quickly regain a sense of solid ground, reestablish a stable routine, and construct a new, temporary sandcastle. The transition itself, the period of raw, unstructured change, is intolerable because it represents the pure, untamed force of impermanence. Take the devastating example of a breakup or a big life shift. You are experiencing the emotional and logistical dissolution of a structured life. Your mind screams, I just want to skip to the part where I'm okay. You don't just want to skip the sadness. You want to skip the uncertainty. You want the finished, healed, stable version of yourself back, even if that version is completely new. The discomfort you feel isn't just grief. It's the profound, existential pain of resisting impermanence. Fighting the fact that you are currently unformed, fluid, and utterly uncontrollable. You are fighting the very nature of reality, and that is a losing battle. Hash, the futility of the fast forward button. The illusion of control is deeply tied to the ability to predict the future. When you hit the fast forward button in your mind, you are trying to write the ending before the middle even makes sense. You are demanding a guarantee of success and peace before you are willing to endure the hard, slow, awkward process of change. This demand creates a state of internal resistance. The breakup happened, the job was lost, the move is underway. These external facts are immutable, but your internal monologue is screaming. This shouldn't be happening. This should be over. I shouldn't be feeling this way. This internal fight, the friction between the mind's desire for control and the reality of flux, is what creates the emotional viscosity, the stuckness. You are not moving because you are expending all your energy pushing back against the flow of change, instead of letting it carry you, however uncomfortably, to the next configuration. The modern anxiety of unprocessed time. In our hyper-efficient, productivity-obsessed culture, the time spent not being okay is viewed as wasted time. You must process, heal, and move on efficiently. The Stoics would approve of the focus on internal control, but they would reject the desire for speed. The point of Stoicism is to endure the external imperturbably, not to rush the external to a quick resolution. We fear the slow, messy process of healing or rebuilding because it feels like a total loss of agency. We try to regain control by controlling the timeline. We set arbitrary deadlines for grief, for adaptation, for feeling normal again. When we miss that deadline, and we always do, because reality doesn't care about our deadlines, we spiral into self-judgment, believing we have failed at the simple task of living. Embracing the temporary shelter. The Taoist perspective offers a crucial correction here. The greatest safety is found not in stability, but in adaptability. The hard, straight tree is broken by the storm. The flexible reed bends and survives. Your anxiety is caused by trying to be the tree when you need to be the reed. The only way out of this trap is to consciously surrender the fantasy of control and accept the radical reality of impermanence. First, practice radical acceptance of the present mess. You must stop saying, "I shouldn't be feeling this way." Replace that statement with the simple declarative, "I feel X right now, and that is okay." Acknowledge that your current state, raw, uncertain, unformed, is the only state possible given the circumstances. This releases the energy you were spending on internal resistance, allowing it to be used for constructive action. Second, embrace the temporary shelter philosophy. Stop trying to build the final, permanent sandcastle. Instead, focus only on the small, temporary shelter needed to survive this specific tide. The temporary shelter might be just getting out of bed, calling one friend, or eating one solid meal. It's a low-stakes, low-pressure unit of stability that requires minimal commitment and can be easily disassembled when the tide shifts again. This action honors the reality of flux while providing necessary immediate comfort. Finally, redefine your goal from control to presence. The goal is not to find stability. The goal is to be fully present for the instability. By practicing mindfulness and engaging deeply with the sensory details of the now, as we discussed in Hedonic Anticipation, you create a stable anchor in the present moment, which is the only truly constant thing. The moment is always the moment. When you accept that the entire universe is in constant motion, you realize that true freedom is found not in stopping the flow, but in learning how to surf. And learning to surf, that takes time, patience, and a willingness to occasionally wipe out dramatically. That wipeout, however, is a perfect temporary moment of total life experience. All right, guys, dim the lights one last time. We've reached the final destination on our deeply existential and slightly humorous journey through the internal traps that keep us feeling stuck. We started by peeling back the layers of frustration, that nagging sense that your life is currently stuck in the waiting room. We didn't look outside for the problem. We looked inside, into the strange, antique, and often contradictory operating system that is your own brain. Now, it's time to bring all 6 villains together for a final confrontation, and more importantly, to give you the blueprint for escaping the psychological labyrinth you've been building for yourself. The 6 pillars of stuckness, a final review. Think of these 6 points not as flaws, but as 6 powerful illusions your mind creates, each designed to protect you from uncertainty, but ultimately succeeding only in paralyzing you. 1. Teleological thinking, the Greek ghost. This was the lie that life is only valuable if it's moving toward a final purpose, or telos. You focused so much on the perfect, finished oak tree that you hated the messy, chaotic present-day acorn. The solution? Redefine the goal as the process. Your purpose is not the future achievement. It's the committed, focused action you take today. 2. Existential anxiety, the Parisian panic. This was the truth that shattered the telos. You are condemned to be free. Freedom means choice, and choice means terrifying responsibility. When faced with this weight, you tried to rush ahead, desperate to escape the fluid discomfort of in-betweenness. The solution? Embrace the smallest step. By breaking the overwhelming choice into tiny, manageable, present-focused actions, you dilute the paralyzing fear of failure and move without panic. 3. The gap between self and ideal self, the Platonic perfectionist. This was the self-judgment engine. You built a fictional, perfect Platonic form of you, the ideal self, and then measured your messy, actual reality against that static perfection. The distance, the gap, created overwhelming shame and paralysis. The solution? Dismantle the ideal and embrace the boring chapter. Focus only on making incremental progress over your past self, not on living up to a fictitious future self. 4. Hedonic Anticipation, the future fixation. This was the emotional heist, the belief that all your happiness is safely stored in the bank account of the future, accessible only after the big transition. This turned the present into a frustrating obstacle course. The solution? Practice foundational joy. Consciously separate the task from the future reward and find small, immediate, resilient joys in the competent execution of the present moment itself. 5. Narrative identity, the bad editor. This was the story problem. You believe your life must conform to the pacing of a well-edited movie, demanding constant forward progress and high drama. When the plot slowed, you felt panic and self-criticism. The solution? Shift the genre to reflective drama. Embrace the messy, slow incubation arc where deep, unseen internal growth occurs, and define progress by the depth of your understanding, not the speed of your external achievement. 6. Impermanence and the desire for control, the existential panic. And finally, the grand master of all anxieties. Transitions remind you that nothing, no job, no relationship, no sense of self, is permanent. You fought this universal truth by trying to speed up the timeline to regain a false sense of control and stability. The solution? Radical acceptance of the present mess. Surrender the timeline, stop resisting the flow, and focus only on building a temporary shelter, small, immediate units of comfort and functionality that allow you to endure the current chaotic tide. The final conclusion, the reality of the unfinished steps. So where does this leave us? If we peel back all these illusions, we realize that the feeling of being stuck is not a failure of character. It's a failure of definition. You are not stuck. You are simply refusing to accept the beautiful, frustrating, messy unfinishedness of being a human being. The world wants you to believe that there is a cheat code, a final, polished version of yourself waiting just around the corner. That's the lie of teleological perfection. The truth is that life is not about achieving stasis. It is about managing flux. Your life will always be an ongoing series of transitions, from one job to the next, from one relationship status to another, from one chapter to a new, entirely unwritten one. The moment you arrive at your telos, your hedonic treadmill will demand the next one, proving the final destination never truly exists. The key to unlocking your life isn't finding the secret destination. It's finding comfort in the act of navigating. It's the small daily triumph of sitting down with your anxiety, existential anxiety, looking at your messy reality, the gap, and deciding, I will do the one small necessary thing right now, even though I have no idea what happens next, and even though it doesn't feel like the climax of a thrilling novel, narrative identity. Your new operating system. Your new operating system is based on presence, process, and acceptance. Presence. Stop using your brain's processing power to write fictional future scenes, hedonic anticipation. Instead, dedicate that energy to engaging fully with the task immediately in front of you. That's where genuine skill is built and where unforced happiness occasionally surprises you. Process. Abandon the goal of being the finished product, the ideal self. Commit only to being the most dedicated producer today. If you define success by the quantity and quality of your daily effort, you cannot be stuck, because effort is always available to you. Acceptance. Let go of the illusion that life should be stable, impermanence. The moment you stop fighting the current moment, the moment you say, this confusion, this slowness, this lack of control is simply the reality of December 2025, you instantly reduce the emotional viscosity that keeps you frozen. Ultimately, the most profound freedom you can claim is the freedom to be imperfect, incomplete, and uncertain, and to still move forward. You are not waiting for life to start. You are living it right now in the messy, unedited scene you are currently inhabiting. Now, go out there and write one messy, imperfect sentence of your beautiful, imperfect story.